Okay, today we're going to keep going with our plan for our handle-inspired dice tower organ. So I went with a bit of an impressionistic look on the bridge. I'll probably still keep developing it. I want to flesh out that red brick effect at the base still yet. But I wanted to move on to the foreground. So one hard and fast rule I follow when I'm landscape painting is I save my yellows for the foreground. So the more yellow, the closer it seems to be to the viewer. And that was hard because I kind of wanted to build a lot of yellows into my bridge like Canaletto, and I resisted. I actually had more yellow at one point and got rid of it, did kind of a blue-gray haze to push it back in space. There's already quite a lot of high contrast between the dark under the arch and the bridge itself. So I didn't want to push it forward too much with more yellow. I might adjust it later. But for now, I want to do a quick wash in the foreground. I mixed blue with a little bit of one of these browns. And now I'm going to bring in some white. And it should provide for me a nice hazy blue. And I just wanted to kind of build up some of the textures, in the foreground, some of the grays. So I kind of decided to avoid the trying to skirt around the tinier boats. I'm just painting over everything and I'll add the boats later. I think that'll be more fun, more fun and satisfying. This sort of horizontal back and forth motion usually does a pretty good job for establishing something that looks a little bit like reflective water. You'll notice that down below now I'm doing some shadow moments, kind of like bring more of a pure cyan blue into the foreground. And you'll notice right under the bridge, they're kind of rough. I'll probably clean them up later. I have, again, going back to a more pure cyan for a few strokes in the foreground, letting color be more saturated in the foreground area. So under the bridge, I have some yellow strokes reflecting in the water because those bridge columns would reflect the color of the brick, which I'm going to pretend is like a warm yellow. So I just kind of notched those in, again, mixed something that was warmish, like those columns, and then just very gently, for some reason I just can't mix that yellow right now. There we go. Helps that I picked up a little dirty blue. Okay. And then I just notched little bitty strokes. So it looks like those bridge columns are reflecting in the water. And you'll see me do that later under and around the boats too. Water is highly reflective. So what is above tends to show up below, right? And then again, I'll do that under and around the boats. So I'm just now switching to a smaller brush, picking up some of that more cyan blue with just a hint of some of the pre-mixed browns that I made. And not quite to the level I see here. I am going to bring out a little bit more detail and darker blue as we come forward. So again, my background, I use that hazy atmospheric color of sort of pale blue. You can do a lavender too as well, if you prefer. And then I'm going darker in this middle ground area. And then in the foreground, I'm going to resaturate all of the colors, make them a bit cleaner and more pure. So again, closer to this middle area. And then I'm going to up the contrast. So the darks will coexist next to the lights a little bit more. And now I'm going to bring in some white, kind of white cap ripples. I can only imagine they would have picked a calm day for Handel's water music and the king to be on the barge, but there might have been a little bit of movement, you never know, breezes and such. So here we go, I'm bringing in just a little bit of dirty white, my skinny little round brush, and I'm just building up a little texture. So this is a pretty impressionistic approach for my foreground. So again, saving the high contrast, the purest bits of white, and the darkest cyans, the purest blues for this foreground area. They'll be more likely to come forward. I don't want the water to grab all the attention, however, right? I want to make sure that the boat's probably the main focal point. Okay, so I'm going to let the water be for now. And I have pre-mixed 3 different browns. And I'm going to try to construct something like this boat here by Canaletto. And I'm going to try to break it down into these various browns. So the shadow color will be my darkest brown, which is again my 3 primaries plus more blue than the other colors. I'm going to do some midtones with this warmer midtone brown, and then this yellow brown plus white will make the highlight kind of gold colors. So here we go. Just before I get started, I'm going to remind myself of what parts I'm most likely to see. And one more time. Okay, and I can still see where my hardware is going to go. All right, well, I'm going to plant the royal barge, if you will. That's indeed what they called it, right about here. And I'm just by sight. Remember, you could do a transfer if you wanted. Gonna block in this royal barge. Not necessarily outlining. There's a little bit of outlining occurring, but for the most part, just kind of like building in shadow shapes. So I see some long, skinny, dark shadow shapes, which really read like lines, but that's going to help me kind of divide up the picture plane and the shape. And later on, I'll be adding the red top. So I have the dark parts kind of blocked in. Now I'm going to add the second boat, which I have moved forward in my composition a little bit, again, because I'm only basing some of the information off of this Canaletto painting, because it doesn't actually depict the water music moment or scene. So here's Handel following, hopefully with his musicians. And then there will be a ton of teeny tiny little boats. I'm only going to use my darkest brown for the boats in the extreme foreground, because again, I'm saving my high contrasts for those foreground elements only, and it's going to be fun how tiny they look. Accounts reported that the Thames was alive with lots and lots of different boats. Everyone wanted to go cruising with the king. I don't know if they had any restrictions or not for who could be on the water at this time, but we'll pretend that quite a few people were out en masse to hear the music. I mean, who wouldn't want to be there, right? Okay, so we've got lots of little cast shadow, darkest moments of some boats. And, you know, I can look at the way other artists depict boats at a distance. There are many examples to base this on. But I'm, for the most part, following the same formula as Canaletto. Now I'm going to pick up more of this mid-tone brown. And there really won't be that much of it. It jumps to pretty pale yellow pretty fast. It's like a really high contrast little boat. So I'm actually going to mix just a little bit more yellow into it, so it's somewhere in between these two. And I want to see what happens if I add a bit of white. That's too much white. So I'm going to go back, a bit more yellow. Okay, and I'll combine these two. All right, some of this is just guesswork. One thing I love about being an artist and doing little crafty projects like this is that you learn, you know, it's all a little bit of a gamble, right? And you figure out what works as you go. Nothing's ever exactly the same as any other creative project, and I love that. My brain enjoys the challenge. So I'm blocking in little blobs on these smaller crafts to look like people or boat infrastructure, if you will. Again, this is going to be very loose, very impressionistic. And to keep a nice point on your smaller brushes, a little extra water is always helpful. And then I like to, when I remove the brush from the water. And again, I only put the very tippy top into the water. Otherwise you get big water beads that come down, gravity, you know, and surprise and create this big blob there. Anyway, it's going to be pretty impressionistic here. Okay, and that's really all I wanted for the shadow shapes. Now I'm going to pick up this brown gold. Again, all three of these were made using my 3 primary colors. And I haven't added white to this one yet. It looks like Canaletto's warm brown has a bit more red than mine. Okay, so here we go. And trying to block the information in as best I can, knowing that acrylic is forgiving and I'll be able to go back in and make alterations and edits. Okay, I'm going to rinse this off. You can see me kind of twirling my brush as well. That's another little thing I do. And this will take quite a bit of multiple passes to go and render these boats to my liking. I'm going to bring in a little bit of white to my lightest, warmest, yellowest gold. And there's a tiny bit of blue in there, so it's not just like a pale yellow, right? These were all browns to begin with. And as always, I like to think a little bit about light logic. You know, the underside of the boat there would have been lit up, perhaps, because of the water reflecting up. There we go, we're on our way. Extra water. Handle's trying to keep up on his little barge. Go, Handle, go. Don't lose the king. There we go. Now, this might be a good enough brush. I'm adding even more water to my lightest yellow-brown, and I'm just gonna go whoop. This might even be better with a skinnier brush than this. There's gonna be a lot of flags. If I were using oil, I might even scratch these in. Those are a little too chunky, but that's okay. I'll return to it. The roof, I love that beautiful red color. I'm going to block that in as well. So kind of nice that the king was likely under the awning. I'm mixing just the barest amount of pale blue into Handle's canopy because this boat is further back in space, and I'm still kind of loosely using that atmospheric color trick. I'm also going to block in some of the flags really loosely back on Handle's boat while my paintbrush is loaded with that diluted red. Now I'm going back to straight red. I'm going to mix in just the barest bit of yellow to kind of brighten it up. And, you know, it's all about pomp, isn't it? So the king's boat would have had colors, flapping. The idea is to impress and intimidate. So I'm going to make sure all of that reads well. Okay. It looks like the oars were red. Who knows if that was true, but we will go with it. We're trusting Canaletto. Again, this is not meant to depict, as far as I know, water music, but it is meant to show like some sort of processional, royal or otherwise, Lord Mayor's Day. Maybe he borrowed the king's yacht. Who knows? So the oars coming out. Might have to redefine those later. There we go. And I'm going to put a notch of red into some of these smaller boats. Whether they were, you know, being patriotic or red oars were a thing, or if this was just a stylistic decision on the part of Canaletto. I'm going to return to my browns. and try to further define, boy, this is so itty bitty, some of these shapes just a bit more. Might be helpful actually to look at this image, might have to do that later, on a computer screen so I can blow it up and see it a little bit better. Sometimes it's nice to not have really great reference photos because then you have to solve the problems on your own, but you know, structurally, I want to get something about this boat, right? So I might go back to my resource. I'm going to return to my darkest brown, block in those initial shadow lines, shadow shapes I started with. And again, I'm still in the blocking in phase. I'm still kind of blurring my eyes, unfocusing my eyes. I'm trying to get basic shapes down, knowing that later on, I'll be able to aim for smaller details. There we go. And my boat's getting a little bit pudgy, so I'll probably have to go in later and modify. Okay, I'm going to add a little more drop shadow to the bottoms of the boats in the foreground. Good. Maybe a little bit to Handel's boat back there. And there we go, give them a bit more presence. Now, and I'm doing all this with the same round brush. I could certainly swap it out, but it seems to be working okay. I had a painting teacher who told me to change my brush as often as possible, lest my strokes get too boring. And it's good advice, but painting miniatures, sometimes that's a little harder. Okay, so I'm mixing up a lighter, brighter yellow-brown by adding more white and more brown. And now, to give the idea of almost like sun reflecting on gold, I have no idea if these boats were gilded or not, but we can imagine. Kind of like putting on fairly dry applications of little dots. Like instead of a continuous stroke, I'm dabbing. And if you look at close at a lot of impressionist works, you'll see that too. There's some nice inherent texture then, and perhaps that evokes more of the quality of metallics in sunlight, right? Gives it a little bit of a shine. And it looks like there's some fancy-dancy details and riggings on this boat. And I won't be able to obviously represent them all. I can try to get some of them. There's a little bit of a warmer yellow down here. Just pulling it forward. And again, I've allowed myself to use this yellow more in the foreground because yellow tends to come forward in landscapes. And, you know, you'll learn a lot of rules, right, in art school, but sometimes they can be broken and you can still pull it off. But in general, I found that to be pretty true, that yellow comes forward in the landscape nicely. Okay, and then a little bit more of a shine and shimmer there. Okay, I'm gonna keep developing Handel's boat. We're on our way. I just want to do a quick check to make sure, yeah, this is pretty good. Yeah, I'm gonna focus my attentions on these areas just a bit more. I'm noticing more of my boats got cropped off down here than I anticipated, so I'm going to try to add a couple more down there. And again, this is very impressionistic. You are welcome to get out your magnifying glasses for if you're doing a landscape too, and even tinier brushes. But for me, I'm enjoying just making impressionistic blobs. So the shadow underside, some of the boats are a little bit more like rafts, it looks like. Some of them are more curvilinearly boat leg. And then lines to imply figures. Okay, that's the mid-tone brown. And then I'll add all sorts of extra little details and such too later. All right, so I'll keep on developing and rendering this and aim for as much detail as is humanly possible. My black flags, they should probably have a bit more blue in them. I might add that later. They almost look like pirate flags. Maybe I shouldn't do black. Maybe I should swap that out with blue. That might look more appropriate. And then just to show you, I'm going to work the negative space a little because these shapes are so teeny tiny and my brush is never thin enough. So I'm going to kind of like define and minimize my boat girth by carving into it with negative shape spaces. There we go. Kind of thinning it out, and it also gives me a chance to imagine, you know, how the water would react to such a large craft. I can do like a little foam that carves through the water, cuts through the water. There, and I'm also thinning my boat out as I do that. Okay, and there's supposed to be little white-clad figures doing a lot of the rowing. It's probably a little brighter than I want. I don't know if this was the military or what. And there's a very, very skinny thread of gold as well that kind of defines the roof. And my water is getting a little dirty, so I'll probably change that out so I don't get rogue pigments. Establishing the roof, a glint of gold. There we go. It's working a little better. Redefine the edge of this flap. Boy, acrylic dries so fast. More yellow. Okay. You might see me spinning my brush. I do that a lot, especially across damp paper towel, to get the cleanest edge possible. The sharpest point. That was not sharp. That was too thick. That's okay. I can thin it out later. Okay. And I was able to pretty much finish. I might still go in with details. One of the side series of panels. So performances, we've got Fishgate, we've got St. Paul's Cathedral, Holly Cathedral, Covent Garden Opera House, or not Cathedral, Holly Church, and then the Thames. So I'm going to set that one aside as being done for now. Today I'm working on the other side. So I did do a couple of them already because they were small and quick. Here we have, these are influences, so a view of Rome. This is Trajan's Column by Joly from 1700s. So it was really hard to fit in that much information, but I did my best. Might go back and tweak it just a bit. And then down here, of course, we have the home of Charles Jennings. So his liturgist for the Messiah and friend, he would stay with him quite a bit at Gopsall Hall. And so remember, one of the organs we were influenced by, or I was influenced by, for this version of the Dice Tower, would have been made for Gopsall Hall with Handel's suggestions. So I did that one first. I also have added some gold detailing on the case, and I'll show you how to do some of that on the front case as well later, or the back. And I got a little bit of a start on one of these down here. So on these series of 4 panels at the top, I'm going to be doing a version of Venice, because Venice was influential when he was a young man. Handel traveled around Italy, would have definitely seen Venice. Here we have a painting by Canaletto, Piazza. And then I was looking for better colors. Obviously, sometimes works of art online, you'll see different versions, and it's best to go with the most legitimate source, but I found a different version, and I'll be using colors probably from both. And then this is Handel's supposed birth house in Halle, and I'll be doing a section of that. And then this one was fun. In its current state, the home that Handel lived in for many years in London, 25 Brook Street, is actually a dual museum called the Handel Hendricks House, because Jimi Hendrix, I believe, lived on one side of it. But I went back further to try to find more original imagery. Here is a sketch from 1725, but it is just black and white, so I was able to discern perhaps which side would have been Handel's. And then here is a more contemporary photograph of the way it currently looks. And so I'll be basing the colors on this image. So you'll note that I did tape the hardware first, which actually was really wonderful and helpful. I think I'll be doing that from now on. It was just a lot easier to see the parameters of that little gold handle. And so even if you cut out a shape that isn't quite perfect, it'll still be nice to preserve the cleaner etched effect underneath. So let's go ahead and continue working on the Handel house in Halle, in his birthplace, Germany. You'll notice I blocked in with a direct approach some of the basic colors. This would be a good time if you're working with certain types of architecture to do dark, medium, and light versions of colors. So I kind of did that initially. I'm going to do a shadow gold, a highlight gold, and kind of a mid-tone gold, and that'll help me out. And the details here are really teeny tiny. So I'm noting that some of the shadow golds are quite warm. So I mixed up a pretty warm yellow with just a little bit of its complementary friends to brown it down just a bit. Again, it's so small. I made a few additional changes to the house itself so that I could make it work compositionally. Sometimes you have to get creative. And it is your painting, right? You get to decide what's included. You know, obviously you just don't pass it off as absolute fact, but I'll say my paintings here are inspired by these locations. So here's my kind of shadow yellow. I'm going to add some white to bring this yellow into more of a highlight version of itself. And really the face of the house could be painted entirely with this kind of highlight version. So it's a little bit lighter than the first pass that I made with the original yellow I mixed up. So I'm sticking with just one brush, and doing multiple passes is totally legitimate, especially as chances are working this small, you'll accidentally overlap or do something you shouldn't. So having multiple passes in the foreground and background, negative space and positive space, is a good way to kind of like have built-in correction chances to kind of correct what you're doing. Don't forget as well to double check that you're including what you think you're including by, you know, framing it with the outside case fairly frequently, because sometimes I'm, you know, putting my whole heart into an area and I realize, oh my gosh, it's not even going to be visible, or it's hardly visible. So multiple layers, multiple applications is a way to correct, define, alter. And sometimes I just dot. Like these little windows up here are so small, probably can barely get that negative shape space of the side that's visible. So I'm just kind of dotting in some of this information, right? The goal is the impression of these forms. So don't sweat the small stuff too much. And sometimes a little dry brush is called for as well to help create a sense of texture, pull things forward in space. That's probably a little too bright. That roof color is a bit more orange, kind of like terracotta, so I went a little too kind of yellow there. Correct. It's going. All right, and then I'm going to go for the even slightly darker shadow for some of the ledges, the lintels, and other darker areas. And I'm not using black. Remember, I'm going to hand mix something that's adjacent to black that's a little warmer. And I think it'll look nicer too than reaching for a black. Black can be kind of deadening. And I'm just very gently blocking in cast shadows from the windows. And again, my proportions are not really truth. I'm aiming for impression. I'm fitting in more or less windows sometimes depending on what area I'm developing, just to like make the composition work a little bit. So basically I'm cheating. I'm giving the impression of Handel's birthplace. So again, having dark, medium, and light versions of each color is a wonderful way to approach a teeny tiny painting like this. So you've got built-in correction when things go a little bit south. And if you have a lot of straight lines, there's nothing wrong with pulling out a straight edge or a ruler. That can be a really nice way to kind of define forms. And if colors kind of repeat throughout the composition, as long as they match the actual value of the other forms, you can usually get away with them not being the local color they originally were. So you can make up color information as long as the value matches the original value. It's still like a 5 or a 6 on a scale of 1 to 10 for the sake of composition. Like the whole piece will flow a little bit better if the colors are more family colors from the same family. Now I'm doing the top of the step. So I had a shadow, quote unquote black, a hand mix. Now I'm doing a highlight gray to show the individual steps. And this is probably my 4th or 5th pass across these stairs. I have to keep defining and redefining them because they're so tiny. And there's a few other shapes I might choose to not define because they're too small and they kind of muck up the composition. I'm also ignoring the digital screen that appears to now be outside of Handel's birthplace. I'm trying to keep it period specific. Now there's some nice little glossy reflections in some of the windows. I could have just used straight white, but I'm going to mix in a little blue because some of them, those bright shiny reflections seem to be reflecting the blue of the sky. And I use such a small amount of blue, you can't really even tell. Looks a tiny bit more in. So I'm just going to kind of dot or even stipple in some little blue marks to kind of show the windows are shiny and reflecting light. Who knows if you can even see this? Actually, I do think I can see it. To give that effect of shiny window reflection. And again, I excluded, I'm not including some of the details down in this area that are more contemporary. Okay. And I'm going to have a little fun with the sky. I just kind of stuck with an overcast day situation sky, but I think we could use a little more drama. What is the complement of yellow or yellow-orange? Well, blue purple. So I might try to make it look a little bit more moody, a little bit more drama up there in the sky. So I'm going to mix kind of a blue purple, brown purple, a little bit something overcast, and just kind of mess with the way that the sky feels a little bit. And with clouds, sometimes you just kind of let the brush do the work for you. Keep it kind of simple. Because, you know, if you're working like I am with some architectural elements, it can be boring, right? So having a little drama, some looser marks, looser strokes, paint that doesn't totally politely blend or come to an end, right? That can be kind of fun in the background. So if you want to have a chance to just kind of paint freely and have some smudginess, the skies might be your go-to spot for that if you're working with landscapes, as I am. And yeah, it's a good way to kind of get some dramatic emotion in too, if that's something you're aiming for. Okay, and then I'm going to do one more pass. You know, there are endless things you could keep doing, little details you could continue adding to any miniature painting, of course. But I just want to block in just a few more teeny tiny details, like what is important to tell this visual story, which lines need more definition. These windows up here for me got a little smudgy, and I think it's really important that they are defined so we can understand what they are. Also, the roof line got a little smudgy, so I'm going to go back in, clean that up just a little more. Okay, and there's some interesting things happening within the roof too, and indicate a few skinny little horizontal lines to try to evoke the texture that's up there. So this is kind of like last pass little details I want to include. What is important, what is significant. Sometimes popping in your highlights and shadows as your last kind of stroke into a painting is a good way to approach it. I want to clarify and define that door just a little bit more. I don't want a big black line down the middle, of course, but it's good to define your darks a few times. There's some nice little handrails I kept fairly subtle. I'm just going to allow a little bit more definition, and I'm having fun. I'm bringing in a little bit more subjective color, some warm, really warm browns, instead of just using straight black. Redefine this window, and a little suggestion of lintels above it. Good. Okay. And I think I'll stop there for now. Sometimes I'll come back at the very end when all the panels are done and kind of bring those panels up together. I'm going to move on to this Handel Hendricks house. Love that. And just because I want to, I'm going to start with the door. That's a really fun entrance way. Love colored doors. So this one, you know, if you do a color theory chart, again, the mantra I like to follow is really, what is the hue identity? I kind of get this from David Horning Color A Workshop Approach, which is excellent. So the first question I usually ask is, what is the hue identity? Well, it's red-orange. And how desaturated is it? I would call this muted. And so then how do I mute it? Well, usually it's through the addition of white, black, gray, or the color complement. And in this case, there's probably a little white and maybe a little gray to sort of darken it up. I'm going with the same approach I took with this other one, which is to kind of block in color. But the colors aren't that exciting, to be honest, in this photograph. So I am going to be using some fun subjective colors. So color not necessarily based on reality. I'm mostly just being truthful and honoring the dark, medium, light color values. But the colors themselves might vary. Just for the sake of clarity and simplicity, I'm also making a few edits, like these beautiful paned windows. I just don't know if I have the patience or the small enough brush to get all, 12 panes into each window. So I'm making some executive decisions, like just kind of blocking in 4 little dark window shapes, the negative space in between the white of the ground of the primer color is functioning as the window braces, and I don't know if that's the right word, but I'm approaching this one with just a little bit more of a relaxed attitude. Okay, the brick is kind of like murky achromatic gray down below, a little bit warmer up above. To mix a gray, you would approach that in the same way you would approach mixing a black. So kind of like the three primary colors with maybe a touch more blue and a little bit more yellow than you might use of red, and then white. Okay, so now I've mixed a nice kind of middle gray here. Whoops, I accidentally picked up more red than I wanted. I'm going to counterbalance that with some blue. Okay, so this is kind of like a warm dull. And then I could add a little yellow to it for my yellow grays, more white for the lighter grays. And I'm going to experiment. I'm just going to have fun with this one. I'm using a little skinny round brush, and I'm kind of almost like cross-hatching, purposefully leaving gaps in between the little bricks I'm referencing for the main building. And I might do a wash, a single wash of color, like a nice neutral, warm, like dirty white after that, so that these bricks show up, but not as much as they currently are showing off. So kind of cross-hatching in brick shapes, brick references where needed. And now I'm going to start adding a little bit of white and yellow to this gray that I mixed up initially, because I noticed that the bricks are getting warmer and more yellow near the top. Okay, so I'm keeping the same pot of paint, but now I am modifying it. You almost get kind of an ombre effect if you do that. So I'm kind of just using my skinny little round brush to cross-hatch in information, just to get a sort of a base effect of texture. There we go. I'll go back to my nice coral color, fill in the side bricks. There we go. And this is a pretty good first pass. So I'm going to keep going back and keep building up colors, mostly staying true to values for this one. Having a little bit more fun with color, like playing a little bit more subjective with my use of color. And then paying most attention to values, light, medium, and dark. Is that a 5? Is that a 6? Is that a 7? And I'll end with this kind of fence here too. So I'm just going to keep on developing this and see how far I get. I'm about to begin my last larger landscape for the side panel. And again, it's going to be based on Canaletto's little scene here of Venice. And I just wanted to note that I'll be using an atmospheric color again. So I'm mixing kind of a sky blue. So this is my cyan primary and white, nice and neutral. It's pretty close, I mean, depending on which version you're looking at of some of Canaletto's paintings from online sources. And I'm just gonna block it in just kind of a loose painterly way, not worrying about overlapping too much. No big deal. You can always go back and modify later. And again, just kind of playing with this idea of a continuous scene, even though I know some of it won't be seen. Bringing in just a little bit more white, which is nice and opaque, to kind of reference some of the poofy clouds got in Canaletto's scenes. Nice and subtle there. And with cloud forms, I love to be just really loose and kind of wiggly. It's almost like the harder you try with clouds, the less effective the outcome is. So I'll stop there, wash my brush, but I'm going to keep a little pot of this cerulean blue going, because in this scene, there's a lot of different buildings, and it could get confusing as to which ones are close to the viewer and which ones are further apart, because they're all kind of blobbed in there together. So I'm going to be sure when I work on the background buildings, they won't be very visible. Mostly they're cropped out, but they'll be in there a little bit perhaps. I'm going to be adding some of that atmospheric color to kind of push them back in space. And it being a lighter value color, very light blue, I will also be helping the background stay lower contrast, which will allow it to sit back in space pretty effectively as well. So here we go. I'm going to assume this building is closer than that one. So I will be mixing a little bit of my atmospheric color into this building. And like I've done in other paintings, I'm going to make 3 versions of this building color. The building's really like a bleached bone white, but I'm going to have a little bit of artistic license and bring just a little bit more yellow and a little bit of warmth into it, just because it's more interesting to look at that way. And then, so this will be my slightly lighter version, and my white's getting a little bit clouded there. I need a little bit more of that. And then I'll have a mid-tone and shadow versions as well. And the shadows, I'll be mixing my own black with my 3 primary colors. And let's try to blend that up just a little bit better. A little bit more red got in there than I was hopeful for. I might still have one other. There we go. It's a little bit lighter and brighter. Okay, so now we'll have 4. Light, and then we'll do kind of a medium, kind of a warm mid-tone orange, and then with the same brush, probably should use another one, I'm going to mix a quick kind of gray-black, using my 3 primaries, again leaning into a little bit more blue than the other colors, and combine that. There we go. So if I'm really quick, if I'm really efficient, I can do a nice blocking in with these light, medium, dark versions of colors. Again, with acrylics, things dry pretty fast, so I'll have to be quick. And then later on, I can add more information and modify. But it's nice to kind of block in and get a start. And I might as well swoop in and try to develop the next building over as well, since that has similar colors and values. And then I'll start bringing that atmospheric color in. And I'll make sure in my foreground to have higher contrast shapes and forms as well. There's a lot in the background, or the foreground, that'll be higher contrast. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to mix in a little bit of my atmospheric color as I proceed for some of my skinnier, smaller shadow shapes. And that just ensures that those values get pushed back just a little bit. So they seem like they're further away. It's a little detail, but it is quite helpful. Okay. And we go. Lots of itty bitty details. Again, I'm just kind of doing a first pass where things are going to be light, medium, and or dark. And I'm not really dealing with this building yet, but got the right color, or at least the right value on my brush. So I'm just kind of blocking in shadow shape. Sometimes I do that. I work the whole page together. This will ultimately be a bit darker, but I just kind of wanted to establish where that'll be. There's just a whole bunch of like little blobs in the foreground that will turn into boats. So I'm just kind of like squinting my eyes so that I lose focus and bringing in some atmospheric color so that those kind of go back in space as well. Okay. And this building is going to be just a bit darker than the one next to it. And again, my job right now is just to block in information. Later on, I will define things with a little bit more care. And I am mixing that little bit of blue into all my colors. And that just does a really, oops, too much water, really does a good job of neutralizing whatever color I'm working with. So it's not too peach. If it were peachy peach I were using, that would come forward quite aggressively. But I added some of my atmospheric color, which is a compliment, and kind of rounded down for me, which is great. Good. And I know this probably won't be in the scene, but there's some buildings way in the back, and I want to just kind of indicate them. So I'm adding even more atmospheric color, and the idea will just be to get the sense that there's some buildings back there. And kind of play it by ear. And I'm already making just a few little corrections to my proportions. I never quite get it right, exactly right the first time. There we go. And now I'm going to try to use this kind of bone white on the building up close. And this is my brighter, not total highlight color, but close. Now I'm slowing down a little bit because these shapes are a little smaller. Mix in a little bit more atmospheric color there. Okay, 1, 2, and oh, I missed a third windows in the facade. So again, correcting some of my really quick sketches that are missing a few things. It happens. Love this structure here. There we go. And remember, you know, this is just for fun. So if I am woefully disregarding some really important architectural structure, well, maybe some of my friends will notice, maybe not. Now I'm going to slightly modify these light, medium, dark colors to match the other building on the right-hand side. That was too much yellow, which is a bit warmer, just a little bit. And I also want to manipulate the image so that it comes forward a little bit more aggressively. So kind of playing up the differences between the two. Really, they're probably fairly similar, just kind of bleached stone. But I would like for a little bit more contrast. So I'm going to block in information on this one. It's kind of a first pass. Oh, that's a lot of little tiny, tiny windows, isn't it? My goodness. I'm going to have to get out the magnifying glass for this one, possibly. Okay. There. Way in the back, there's a similar colored building, but I've mixed in my pale blue atmospheric color to push that building back because I don't want it to compete too much with my buildings in the foreground. There's quite a bit of warmth as well. There we go. kind of a pink hue. And you can see me in real time correcting my initial mistakes with the drawing, with the proportions. And, you know, as long as I roughly had things in about the right space, that's never too upsetting. Like, there's always some adjustment. And also compositionally, you know, it could be I make some executive decisions. If I were, you know, documenting something, I wouldn't take such license, of course. But I'm not. Just making a dice tower for fun. Okay. So I'm off and running, and I'm just going to keep on blocking in the shapes, doing my best to keep the colors flowing across the two different small picture planes. And every now and then I like to do this, just to double check what's going to be seen and what isn't seen. That's right. And I think I will do painter's tape on top of, there we go, on top of the little bits of hardware. I did it down here, and you can see I was a little off, but it's still kind of nice that I can really carefully see the parameters of both of those bits of hardware. And then if I have to fill in little gaps, not the end of the world.